Hello. Hopefully you can hear me relatively well. I don't think the audio situation's great here. So if I'm not speaking loud enough, tell me, because I might not notice. So yeah, I'm Ross from DXDAO. I'm the lead of DXGov. So we're building out governance products for DXDAO as well as the rest of the space. Yeah, so my talk's overlooked, accessible autonomy. For anyone who's talked to DXDAO folks before, you're probably going to be pretty surprised, but this talk isn't about decentralization, at least not directly, and we'll get back to that at the end. No, this talk's about the A in DAO, autonomy. Just a brief explanation for anyone not too familiar with autonomy. The easiest analogy is like nation state, autonomy, sovereignty. It's not about automation, common misconception. And if you want to know more about autonomy and sovereignty, Chris Powers from DXDAO did a great talk last DAOist. Sure, if you go searching, you can find that. But yeah, we're talking about autonomy today. So how can we use autonomy in DAOs? So in DXDAO, we have two main sort of proposals. We have signal proposals, just text. They don't really do anything. You rely on contributors to implement the text or go and actually implement it. It's not really what DAOs are about. What we're talking about today is proposals with actions. That is how we utilize autonomy. It's how we exercise autonomy in DAOs. Proposals are code. This is what makes DAO special. If we didn't have that, it would kind of just be a bunch of people saying things and maybe doing them. But proposals that are code and actually execute something is how DAOs operate on-chain. Without it, there's not a lot we can do. So what can we use it for? Currently, the main way DAOs use their autonomy is kind of similar to how crypto initially got started. A lot of it's just transferring money around. It's kind of like how if you explain to your parents what you're doing with crypto, you're like, oh yeah, like money moves between countries without banks. And everyone here is probably pretty aware that's really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of Web3 and everything we're doing. And it's the same with DAOs. Right now, a lot of what DAOs use their autonomy for is just like moving funds around, giving this person some money to go off and do something, or investing in something, or paying contributors. But as with explaining cryptocurrency, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot we can do. So what do we do if we're doing more than just transferring ERC20 tokens? There's a lot of things here. The most obvious one is probably like protocol management. So Maker was just up before me. They do a great job of utilizing their autonomy to manage their protocol. And there's a lot of examples of that. The next one is a DXDAO favorite, unconquerable products. This is how we use ENS plus IPFS to own our front ends. The DAO owns the reference to the front ends and how our users are accessing our front ends. If you want to know more on this, Sky's doing a talk later today. I think it's on the main stage towards the end of the day. And we're always happy to shill how we manage our products and do releases. The next one is, I think, probably going to be the next big boom in DAOs. That's treasury management. So we talked about moving money around, but you can move money around, but there's a difference between doing that and investing your treasury or diversifying your treasury. So a cool example of how DXDAO is dipping our toes into this is with CowSwap. So just a couple of weeks ago, we set our first limit order, which for a DAO that moves slowly and is very public, limit orders are important. Not getting front run is kind of essential. So that's pretty awesome and a nice use of autonomy. In some of our newest applications, like Project Davi, which is our governance application, we're playing around with actually having the DAO control parts of the front end as well, in a similar way to unconquerable products. But yeah, I won't dive too deep into that. The list really goes on. You could do NFT minting, you could do vesting contracts for contributors. I think the best way of thinking about how you can utilize autonomy is that a DAO is essentially the same as a user. Anything you can think about doing in Web3, your DAO should be able to do as well. If it's on-chain, then there's no reason you shouldn't be able to do it. One of my personal favorites that we're trying to build out in our application is voting in other DAOs as a DAO. So I won't spend too much time on this because I could talk about it for a good hour or so. But if you can incentivize a more senior DAO and experienced DAO to start helping these smaller DAOs move in a direction or helping them with governance, that's a pretty powerful tool. And you can do it with autonomy. If you're doing on-chain voting, then there's no reason you can't vote in another DAO, even create proposals for another DAO as a DAO. So there's UX challenges there, but it's something we're working on. So if we can do all this cool autonomy stuff, why don't we see it more often? And it's like a good question. Essentially, there's a bit of a UX problem. It's not so much a technical problem. Actually, doing a Solidity dot call is not complicated. The difficult part is having a user interface that can like support that and be secure at the same time. So this is a bit of a scale with poor UX and great UX on one side, then full autonomy and little autonomy on the other axis. So here we see DAOs with flexible but complex systems. So I don't know how many of you have experience making proposals, but if you're trying to do something complex, it's pretty complex to do. You kind of need to put in APIs or like select Solidity functions by using their function signatures and understand what the code is doing on like a very deep level before you're doing any of this stuff with a DAO, which isn't great. It creates a very high barrier of entry to DAOs. And then on the other side, we have DAOs with great UX, amazing UX. It doesn't even need to be improved right now, but you're pretty limited in what you can do. For the most part, it's like sending ERC20 tokens. Back to our initial analogy of like, what is autonomy currently used for? That's why. It's because it's easy to do, in UX at least. And some platforms have both of these, but very few, if any, have what we've started calling accessible autonomy. That is not just having a UX for a few actions, but having amazing UX for everything and having it be flexible. So there's a few parts of accessible autonomy. But essentially, the idea is that anyone should be able to use your DAO. Anyone should be able to run a DAO. Anyone should be able to govern in your DAO and fully understand what's happening with on-chain proposals. Yeah, as I said, UX challenge. There's a couple of parts of that. There's creating proposals. You need to be able to input things in a normal way. Like the UI should be asking you for the details that it wants in a human-readable way. You shouldn't be like writing 100 zeros on the end of a thing or writing Unix timestamps, etc. And then on the other side, the proposal still has to remain accessible after you've created it. The people voting in the proposal should also be able to understand your proposal, even if they don't have technical background. So this is just to visualize a little bit how DAOs currently look. This is at the very least how DXDAO, for the most part, looks. We have users, which we rely upon for governance. These are people that do most of the governance decisions, most of the voting, and most of the auditing of proposals. They're technical contributors. They're developers. As I'm sure basically all of you know, that's a rare resource is developers. And using their time for governance is not always the best thing, especially if it's your only option for governance. And then we have all of these other parts of a DAO. This is also only scratching the surface of how many different roles there are in a DAO. There's biz dev, there's treasury managers, there's product people, there's capital stakeholders, marketing, non-tech people, or just anyone with an idea for what the DAO should be doing and a plan for what it should be doing. And they're left out of governance right now. They're essentially a separate entity because there's this huge barrier of entry to doing governance. And so you see some nice inputs in here. We have the start date. It was on the 5th of October. We have how long before cliff. It's just a year, 2 years. The number of tokens is just readable. It's very nice. And yeah, anyone could really fill this in if they understood that they want to vest some tokens. And that's what the requirement should be. And so if we add this action, we see that it's in our action builder. Awesome. We still see all these details. They're still human readable. And so we create the proposal. And so then, for example, we have another user comes along and they're looking at our voting interface and they see, oh, there's a new proposal. I wonder what it's doing. And they see right immediately we're having 2 DXD creating a vesting contract. It's pretty clear. So obviously that's not all the information. You would want to check more before you voted on something, especially if it's dealing with funds. And so you can still see that. I'll move out of the way a bit. But you can see a bit more details here. We still have that human readable explanation of what this proposal is doing. You can't always rely on a nice description. I couldn't be bothered with a nice description here. It just says accessible autonomy at work. But we can still see what's actually happening. And so if you want to audit it some more, you can jump another level deeper. We can see, if we press the drop down, we have all of these inputs that we had before. We have a date, we have a year, and they're still human readable. And this is everything that's getting sent to the contract. Now, you might have noticed there's another part in here. As I would hope a few of you would know, generally before you're doing transactions or calling contracts, you need to do an approval. If you don't know, essentially when you go to Uniswap, you have to approve tokens before you swap them, right? DAOs are the same. We have to play by those rules. It's still Ethereum. But we don't want users to know that they have to approve a token before they're calling contracts. We certainly don't want to be approving infinite tokens for the DAO. That's a big, scary no-no. So we do it automatically for people. It's kind of hidden away in here, but if you look at it, we can still see we're approving a spending call, and then we're creating a vesting contract. So yeah, the cool part about this is how it's built. We could very easily make a demo of this and just hard code all this stuff, but this is flexible. We can adapt this system to just about any contract in Ethereum. There's some asterisks there. We're just on V1 and already have plans for V2 to make this better, but that's the whole idea. And then, if you want to go further, this might look a bit more familiar to people that have tried to do governance in other platforms before, but if you toggle a thing, you can see the raw data, and you have these awful big numbers, which no one understands, essentially. They're seconds to represent years, and they're Unix timestamps. That's 2 tokens in way, but you can still go in and audit this, which is important. And the takeaway here is proposals are code, but they should not look like code. If they look like code, you've messed something up. Or you're a developer and you've dug down this deep, in which case, good for you. Yeah, and burying this away isn't an option. That's very unsecure. If you just rely on your description, then you're going to have a bad time when people are not paying attention to your DAO and someone creates a proposal to drain your treasury, or with full autonomy, just about anything they could think of on Ethereum. So, I said at the start that this was not about decentralization. I was lying. It's all about decentralization. The idea I'm trying to pitch is that accessible autonomy leads to decentralization. Imagine if we look back at that graph where we had this big group of people excluded from governance and this small group of people doing governance and understanding it. What happens when you remove that blockade and you have a large group of diverse individuals deciding what an organization does? It's decentralization, it's autonomy, it's a decentralized autonomous organization, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, decentralization and autonomy are very closely linked together. One helps the other helps the other one. So yeah, everything you've seen here, we've been trying to build out in our new governance project called Project Davi. We're attempting to launch an open beta for DevCon Bogotá. We also ran a hackathon over the weekend, and that took a lot of time. But we should be on track for launching in DevCon. potentially even today, depending on how late we stay up. But you can also access the landing page right now. As I mentioned before, we use unconquerable products. It's hosted on .eth, accessed via .limo, as with all DXDAO products. So if you want to go there and take a look at it, you are more than welcome. Yeah, Project Davi, a temporary name that might not be temporary. And that's the end of the talk. If you want to get in touch with me to ask me any questions about the talk, or just in general about DXDAO, you can scan this lovely QR code here, made by our friends at NIMI, DXDAO, I guess, funded project, is maybe the best way of saying it. It came out of a hackathon, and is very awesome. Go make your NIMI page, and you can access all of my contact details through there, as well as seeing my ENS, etc. And DXDAO, I'm kind of blocking DXDAO right now. But DXDAO, we have a DXDAO homepage where you can see everything that we're doing, all the cool stuff we get up to, and of course Twitter, DXDAO_. Go follow us. I think that's everything. Any questions? Yeah?
With regards to the vesting, what happens if somebody gets off-boarded, DAO ecosystem player, actor, or if they quit, rage quit? And the second part of the question is, with regards to autonomy, man, that's a hard thing to do. How do you 100% make sure? Let's put it this way: is there a DAO right now that's 100% autonomous?
Good question.